The parking lot behind Murphy's diner reeked of grease and desperation at 2 a.m. Sarah clutched her sleeping toddler tighter as her 8-year-old son pressed his face against the fogged car window, stomach growling loud enough to break her heart. 3 days without a real meal, 2 weeks since the eviction. She'd sold everything except her mother's wedding ring, and even that wouldn't buy them more than another night in this rust-bucket car. Tank Maddox had killed men with his bare hands. As Sergeant-at-Arms for the Devil's Reign MC, he'd earned his patch through blood and brutality. But watching this woman count nickels and dimes while her kids wasted away stirred something he thought was dead. His leather cut bore the patches of a lifetime criminal, but his next words would change everything. Get up. You're coming with me. What Tank didn't know was that saving this family would put them all in the crosshairs of his own club, and some sins can't be outrun, even by a man trying to find his soul. But can a hell angel really become someone's salvation? Sarah's head snapped up at the gruff voice, her grip tightening protectively around 3-year-old Emma. Through the cracked window, she saw a mountain of a man standing beside her car. Leather jacket stretched across massive shoulders, arms thick as tree trunks, and a beard that couldn't hide the jagged scar running from his left ear to his jaw. The patches on his vest caught the diner's neon light. A skull with flaming wings, Devil's Reign MC in blood-red letters. "I don't want any trouble," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the glass. Tank studied her face. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under eyes that probably hadn't seen real sleep in weeks. The boy in the passenger seat couldn't have been more than 8, all elbows and knees in clothes 3 sizes too big. Hand-me-downs, probably from some church donation box. "Neither do I, lady." His voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes and hard nights. "When's the last time those kids ate?" Sarah's chin lifted with the stubborn pride that had carried her through 2 weeks of sleeping in parking lots and public restrooms. "That's none of your business." Maybe not. Tank glanced around the empty lot, then back at the pathetic scene inside the rusted Honda. "But I just watched you count the same handful of change 4 times. That tells me everything I need to know." He'd been heading back to the clubhouse after collecting a debt, the kind of collection that left blood on his knuckles and fear in a man's eyes. Standard Tuesday night for Tank Maddox, but something about this broken-down car in the shadows had caught his attention. Maybe it was the small hand pressed against the rear window, or the way the woman's shoulders shook as she tried not to wake her sleeping daughter while she cried. "Look, I got a place," Tank said, surprising himself with the offer. "Clean beds, full kitchen, no strings." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Right, a biker offering charity to strangers. What do you really want?" The question hit harder than it should have. What did he want? Tank had stopped asking himself that question years ago when wanting things only led to disappointment. He wanted his brother Joey back from that roadside bomb in Afghanistan. He wanted his old man to have been something other than a drunk who used his fists to make his points. He wanted to wake up one morning without blood under his fingernails. But looking at this kid's hollow cheeks, what he wanted was simpler. "I want those babies to eat something that didn't come from a vending machine." 8-year-old Danny had been listening, his young face pressed against the window. "Mom, I'm really hungry." The words broke something in Sarah's chest. She'd been holding it together through sheer willpower, but her son's quiet admission shattered her last defense. Emma stirred in her arms, whimpering softly. Tank crouched down to window level, making himself less intimidating. "Name's Tank. I know how this looks. Big scary biker, woman alone with kids. You got every right to be suspicious. But I also know how hunger looks on a kid's face, and your boy's got it bad." Sarah studied his weathered features, searching for deception. She'd gotten good at reading men's intentions since Danny's father walked out when she was pregnant with Emma. This one was dangerous. That much was obvious from the scars and the patches. But there was something else in his dark eyes. Something that reminded her of her own father after he came back from Desert Storm. "Why?" she asked simply. Tank was quiet for a long moment. "Because somebody should have helped me and my brother. when we were hungry kids sleeping in our car. Nobody did. The truth hung between them in the cold night air. Sarah looked at her children, Emma's pale face, Danny's ribs showing through his thin shirt, and made a choice that terrified her. "If you try anything, you'll what?" Tank asked gently. "Lady, you're running on empty. Let me help." Sarah opened the car door. The Walmart parking lot stretched out like a concrete wasteland under the harsh fluorescent lights, casting everything in sickly yellow hues. Marcus Tank Rodriguez pulled his Harley into a spot near the back, the engine's rumble echoing off the empty shopping carts scattered around like metallic tumbleweeds. 3 in the morning was prime hunting time for repo men and cops looking to hassle anyone who didn't belong, but Tank had business here that couldn't wait for daylight. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the artificial twilight. The iron wolf's patch on his leather vest caught the light, a snarling wolf's head surrounded by chains and flames. 12 years he'd worn those colors, 12 years of loyalty bought with blood and sealed with silence. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't pin down why. The beat-up Honda Civic sat 3 rows over, just where Razor had said it would be. Tank had dismissed his prospect's rambling report about the car's occupants earlier, but something nagged at him enough to ride out here and see for himself. Maybe it was the way Razor's voice had cracked when he described the kids, or maybe Tank was just getting soft in his old age. At 34, he was practically ancient by club standards. He approached the Honda on foot, his steel-toed boots silent on the asphalt. The car's windows were fogged with breath, and he could make out huddled shapes inside. A woman in the driver's seat, her head tilted back in restless sleep. 2 smaller forms curled up in the back, kids, just like Razor had said. Tank circled the vehicle slowly, his trained eye cataloging details. California plates 6 months expired. Rear bumper held on with duct tape. Back seat crammed with garbage bags that probably held everything they owned. The woman stirred as his shadow passed over the windshield, and for a moment their eyes met through the glass. Fear, that's what he saw first, raw and immediate, but underneath it something harder, defiance maybe, or desperation twisted into determination. She didn't wake the children or try to start the car, just watched him with those dark eyes, waiting to see what kind of predator had found them this time. Tank stepped back and lit a cigarette, making himself less threatening. The woman cracked her window an inch. "We're not causing trouble," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We'll move on in the morning." "Where you headed?" Tank asked, keeping his tone neutral. She hesitated. "North, maybe Portland. I heard there's work there." The lie hung between them like smoke. Nobody drove from California to Oregon and stopped to sleep in a Walmart parking lot in the middle of Arizona, unless they were running from something or someone. "Kids look hungry," he observed. The woman's jaw tightened. "We're fine." Tank took a long drag from his cigarette, studying her face. Mid-20s probably, though hard living had aged her around the eyes. Pretty once, maybe still was under the layers of worry and sleeplessness. The defensive set of her shoulders reminded him of cornered animals he'd seen, ready to fight even when fighting meant dying. "Got a McDonald's about 2 miles up the road," he said finally. "Stays open all night. Coffee's not terrible. I don't have money for—" "Wasn't asking you to pay." She stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to work out his angle. Tank didn't blame her. In his experience, nobody offered help without wanting something in return, and a man his size wearing iron wolf's colors probably looked like every nightmare she'd ever had about what could happen to a woman alone with 2 kids. "Why?" she asked. Tank flicked his cigarette away and watched the ember die on the asphalt. Good question. Why did he care about some random family sleeping rough? The club had taught him to look out for his own and let everyone else fend for themselves. Sentiment was a luxury that got you killed in his line of work. But those kids in the back seat couldn't be more than 6 or 7 years old, and something about the careful way they'd arranged themselves to share the single blanket made his chest tight. "Because I'm hungry too," he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "And eating alone sucks." The woman glanced back at her children, both still asleep despite the conversation. When she looked at Tank again, some of the fear had been replaced by calculation. "You're not a cop," she said. "No, but you're not exactly a good Samaritan either." Tank almost smiled at that. "No," he agreed, "I'm not." She was quiet for another minute, weighing risks against the promise of a hot meal for her kids. Tank had seen that particular arithmetic before, the desperate calculus of the powerless. "The McDonald's up the road?" she asked finally. 2 miles. Can't miss it." The morning sun cut through the garage's grimy windows as Marcus finished changing the oil on his Harley. The rhythmic clink of tools had become a meditation, drowning out the chaos in his head from the night before. He'd barely slept, haunted by the image of those kids huddled in that beat-up sedan. "You're up early," Snake's gravelly voice echoed through the garage. The club's sergeant-at-arms leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his leather vest. "Thought you'd been nursing a hangover after last night's celebration." Marcus wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag, not meeting Snake's eyes. "Couldn't sleep." Funny thing happened this morning. Snake's boots scraped against concrete as he stepped closer. Jimbo from the diner called. Said someone paid the tab for a family with kids. Big tip too, real generous for a Tuesday morning. The wrench in Marcus's hand felt heavier. He'd hoped nobody would connect the dots, at least not this quickly. Lot of good Samaritans out there. "Sure are." Snake's laugh held no humor, especially ones who drive motorcycles and pay cash. Jimbo's got good eyes for details. Marcus finally looked up, meeting Snake's cold stare. "What's your point?" "My point is that generosity can be dangerous in our line of work. Makes people memorable, makes them ask questions." Snake picked up a socket wrench from the workbench, examining it like a weapon. "Viper's got big plans brewing, can't afford distractions." The garage door rattled open before Marcus could respond. Diesel rolled his bike inside, followed by 2 prospects Marcus barely knew. The newcomers had that hungry look, eager to prove themselves, willing to do anything for the patch. "Meeting tonight," Diesel announced, killing his engine. "Viper wants everyone there, no exceptions." His eyes found Marcus. "That includes you, brother." The afternoon crawled by in a haze of routine maintenance and forced conversation. Marcus kept checking his phone, though he wasn't sure why. The family from the parking lot had no way to contact him, and he had no business checking on them anyway. Snake's warning echoed in his head. Distractions were dangerous. By evening, the clubhouse buzzed with nervous energy. 23 members packed into the back room, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Viper sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, his silver hair slicked back, predatory smile playing at his lips. "Gentlemen," Viper's voice commanded instant silence. "Opportunity's knocking, and we're going to kick the door down." He spread a map across the table, pointing to a route highlighted in red. "Distribution networks expanding. We're taking over the eastern corridor, everything from the interstate to the river. Double our territory, triple our income." Marcus studied the map, recognizing the neighborhoods. Working-class areas, struggling families, kids walking to school on those very streets. The knot in his stomach tightened. "Problem is," Viper continued, "the serpents think they own that territory. They're wrong, but they won't give it up easy. We're going to war, boys." Excited murmurs filled the room. The prospects looked ready to start shooting immediately. Even some of the veterans nodded approval. More territory meant more money, more respect. "Timeline's aggressive," Snake added, unfolding a detailed schedule. "We start flooding their corners tomorrow night. Hit them hard and fast before they know what's happening." Diesel raised his hand. "What about civilians? Those neighborhoods are crawling with families." "Collateral damage." Viper's shrug was glacial. "Not our problem if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Fear keeps people in line anyway." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of Emma's terrified face, of Tyler's protective stance in front of his little sister. How many families would get caught in the crossfire? How many kids would pay the price for the club's expansion? "Assignments go out tonight," Viper announced. "Every member pulls weight on this. No exceptions, no excuses. Anyone who can't handle the heat should speak up now. The room fell silent. Marcus felt every eye on him, waiting for him to volunteer for whatever violence Viper had planned. The smart play was to keep his head down, take his assignment, and prove his loyalty. The safe play. Instead, he found himself thinking about Tyler's proud smile when he'd ordered pancakes for his family, about Sarah's grateful tears when a stranger showed unexpected kindness, about all the families in those neighborhoods who had no idea what was coming. Questions. Viper's gaze swept the room, lingering on Marcus a beat too long. Marcus stayed silent, but inside, everything was changing. For years he'd told himself the club was family, that loyalty meant everything. But what kind of family deliberately hurt innocence? What kind of brotherhood demanded he become a monster? The meeting continued around him, but Marcus barely heard the details. He was thinking about choices, about lines he'd never imagined crossing, about a woman and her children who'd shown him something he'd forgotten existed. Hope for something better. The war was coming, and Marcus knew he'd have to choose sides. The rumble of Harley engines filled the warehouse as the Iron Wolves gathered for church. Marcus parked his bike in the designated spot, the familiar ritual doing nothing to ease the knot in his stomach. 3 days had passed since he'd moved Sarah and her kids into the motel, and every moment felt borrowed. He'd checked on them twice, once with groceries, once just to make sure they were safe. Emma had started smiling when she saw him, clutching that ratty stuffed rabbit like it was made of gold. The sight did something to his chest, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Reaper. Viper's voice cut through his thoughts as he entered the warehouse. "You're late." "Traffic," Marcus lied, pulling off his leather gloves. The truth was, he'd sat in the motel parking lot for 20 minutes, watching Tommy help his mother fold their few clean clothes while Emma drew pictures on the backs of receipts. Normal people doing normal things. It was hypnotic and terrifying. The warehouse smelled of motor oil, cigarettes, and something else, something metallic that Marcus recognized from too many years of violence. Blood had a particular scent that never fully disappeared, no matter how much bleach you used. 23 men formed a rough circle around the scarred wooden table that served as their altar. This was sacred ground for the Iron Wolves, where decisions were made and fates sealed. Marcus took his usual position, third from Viper's right hand, a spot earned through loyalty and an willingness to do what others couldn't stomach. "Brothers," Viper began, his grey eyes scanning the faces before him, "we've got problems. The Diablos think they can move product through our territory without paying tribute. They're wrong." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Territorial disputes were nothing new, but the Diablos were backed by serious money, cartel money. This wouldn't be settled with harsh words and posturing. "Reaper." Viper's gaze locked on Marcus. "You and Tank are hitting their warehouse tomorrow night. Send a message they can't ignore." The familiar weight of expectation settled on Marcus's shoulders. He'd done this dance 100 times before. Violence as diplomacy, brutality as business. But now Sarah's face flashed in his mind, the way she'd flinched when he'd first approached their car. How many women had looked at him with that same terror after he'd destroyed their lives? "What kind of message we talking about?" Tank asked, cracking his knuckles. Tank had earned his nickname by being built like military hardware and just as destructive. He was the kind of man who smiled before he hurt people. "The permanent kind," Viper replied. "Time to remind everyone why they pay their dues." Marcus felt his phone buzz against his chest. A text from Sarah. "Emma's asking when the nice man is coming back. Thank you again for everything." The words hit him like a physical blow. Nice man. When was the last time anyone had called him that? When was the last time he'd deserved it? "You with us, Reaper?" Viper's voice carried an edge of suspicion. "You seem distracted lately." Every eye in the room turned to Marcus. These men knew him as a weapon, reliable and ruthless. They'd seen him break bones and end lives without hesitation. The idea that a desperate mother and her children had cracked something inside him would be laughable, if it wasn't so dangerous. Just thinking about angles, Marcus said carefully. Diablos aren't pushers working street corners. They've got security, connections. Need to be smart about this. Viper nodded slowly, but his stare lingered. Smart's good, but when push comes to shove, you do what needs doing. That's who you are. The meeting continued for another hour. Logistics, territories, the endless machinery of organized crime. Marcus participated when expected, but his mind kept drifting to room 237 at the Starlight Motel, to Emma's gap-toothed smile and Tommy's protective stance in front of his mother, to Sarah's exhausted gratitude that someone had shown them basic human kindness. When church ended, Marcus lingered as the others filtered out. Viper remained seated, studying a map of the city marked with territories and rival claims. "Something you need to say?" Viper asked without looking up. Marcus chose his words carefully. "Just wondering if there's another way. War with the Diablos could bring heat we don't need." Now Viper did look at him. Really looked. "You're not paid to wonder, Reaper. You're paid to execute. Tomorrow night, you and Tank remind the Diablos why crossing us is a fatal mistake." Marcus nodded and turned to leave, but Viper's voice stopped him. "And Marcus? Whatever's got you thinking too much lately, fix it. Brotherhood comes first, always." Outside, Marcus lit a cigarette with shaking hands. In 18 hours, he'd be expected to commit violence that would solidify his place in this world. But that same violence would make him exactly the kind of man Sarah would need to protect her children from. The choice he'd been avoiding was running out of time to make itself. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jake slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from Sarah. She clutched a steaming cup of coffee like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality, while Emma and Tyler demolished pancakes at the adjacent table, their laughter a sharp contrast to the tension etched across their mother's face. "Tell me what happened," Jake said, keeping his voice low enough that the kids couldn't hear. His jacket hung loose around his shoulders, the iron wolf's patch turned inward against the booth back. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her cup. "Marcus found us yesterday. I thought we'd put enough distance between here and Phoenix, but he has connections everywhere." She glanced toward her children, ensuring they were still distracted by their food. "He said, if I don't come back by tomorrow night, he'll make sure I never see them again." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd seen men like Marcus before, predators who used fear as currency and violence as punctuation. "What's he holding over you?" "Money. A lot of it." Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "When I left him, I took what I needed to start over. He's calling it theft, but it was money I earned, money for groceries and rent that he'd gamble away or spend on his other women." The enforcer in Jake wanted details, amounts, timelines, leverage points. But the man who'd watched Emma sleep peacefully in a motel bed just wanted to make the problem disappear. "How much are we talking?" 15,000. Jake whistled low. It wasn't an impossible sum, but it might as well have been $1 million to a woman living in her car. He studied Sarah's face, noting the purple shadows under her eyes, the way she flinched every time the diner's bell chimed with a new customer. "There's something else," she continued. "Marcus isn't working alone anymore. He's hooked up with some biker crew out of Tucson. They're expanding their operation, and apparently I know too much about their money laundering setup." Ice formed in Jake's stomach. Tucson meant the Scorpions, a rival club that had been pushing into Iron Wolves territory for months. If Marcus was connected to them, this situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. His phone buzzed. A text from Diesel: "Church tonight, 8 p.m. Mandatory." Jake stared at the screen, knowing that mandatory church meetings meant serious club business, the kind that often ended with someone bleeding or worse. He glanced back at Sarah, who was watching Tyler attempt to balance a piece of pancake on his fork like a tiny syrup-covered seesaw. "I might have a way to help," he said finally, "but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Sarah met his eyes, searching for something. Hope, maybe, or just the absence of cruelty she'd grown accustomed to. I don't have much choice, do I? There's always a choice. That's what I'm learning. Before she could respond, Jake's phone rang. Reaper's name flashed on the screen. He considered letting it go to voicemail, but ignored calls from the club president had consequences. Yeah. Where the fuck are you, brother? Reaper's voice carried the edge it got when he was mixing business with beer. Need you at the clubhouse. Now. I'm handling something. Give me an hour. This ain't a request, Jake. We got visitors from Tucson, and they're asking about some woman and her kids. Real interested in anyone who might be helping her out. Jake's blood turned to ice water. Across the table, Sarah had gone pale, somehow sensing the shift in the conversation. Be right there, Jake said, ending the call. What is it? Sarah asked. Jake looked at Emma and Tyler, still innocent in their booth, syrup-sticky and laughing. Then he looked at Sarah, who'd already begun to gather her purse, preparing to run again. Change of plans, he said. We're not running anymore. Jake, you don't understand. These people... No, you don't understand. He leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority that made grown men step aside when he walked into a room. I've spent 10 years being the thing mothers warn their children about. But those kids of yours? They're sleeping through the night for the first time in months because they feel safe. That means something. He stood, dropping a 50 on the table for their meal. I'm going to fix this, but first, I need to get you somewhere secure. There is no secure. Not from Marcus, and definitely not from his new friends. Jake pulled on his jacket, the Iron Wolves patch now visible again. Lucky for you, they're not the only ones with friends. As they prepared to leave, Jake caught his reflection in the diner's window. The man looking back at him wore the same face, the same scars, the same colors. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't just enforcing someone else's will. He was choosing his own war. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Marcus pulled his Harley up to the diner where he'd told Sarah to meet him. She was already there, sitting in her beat-up Honda with the kids in the back seat, looking like she might bolt at any second. The wariness in her eyes hadn't faded, but desperation had brought her here anyway. He killed the engine and approached slowly, hands visible. Emma pressed her face against the window, offering him a tentative wave that made something twist in his chest. You came, he said when Sarah rolled down the window. I don't have much choice. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white against the steering wheel. What did you find? Marcus glanced around the parking lot, old habits making him check for threats. There's a place. Small house on the edge of town. Owner's an old friend who owes me a favor. No questions asked, first month's rent covered. Sarah's breath caught. What's the catch? No catch. The lie came easier than it should have. He'd already decided not to tell her about the conversation with Reaper, about the job that would pay for this kindness. Some burdens were his alone to carry. People don't just help strangers, Sarah said, studying his face. Especially people like you. The assessment stung because it was accurate. People like him didn't help desperate mothers. They were the reason mothers became desperate in the first place. But something about this woman and her children had cracked something open inside him that he'd thought was permanently sealed. Maybe I'm not as much of a lost cause as I thought, he said quietly. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, weighing options she didn't really have. Finally, she nodded. Show me. The drive across town felt like crossing between two different worlds. Marcus led the way on his bike, checking his mirrors to make sure Sarah's Honda kept up despite its obvious mechanical issues. The house was in an older neighborhood, modest but clean, with a small yard where the kids could play. He waited by his bike as Sarah got out to look around. Tommy bounded out after her, his earlier fear apparently forgotten in the excitement of a potential new adventure. Emma followed more cautiously, still clutching that worn stuffed rabbit. It's got 2 bedrooms, Marcus explained, pulling the key from his pocket. Kitchen works, heat's on. Landlord says there's a grocery store within walking distance, and the elementary school's just a few blocks over. Sarah turned to him, suspicion warring with hope in her expression. Why are you doing this? Because when I look at your kids, I see the childhood I never had. Because helping you might be the first decent thing I've done in years. Because maybe if I save someone else, I can convince myself I'm not completely damned. Everyone deserves a chance, he said instead. She studied him like she was trying to solve a puzzle, then looked back at the house. Tommy was already exploring the yard, investigating a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. Emma had moved closer to the front porch, still cautious but curious. There has to be conditions, Sarah said. Rules, expectations, just one. Marcus met her eyes. You don't ask questions about where I go or what I do. We keep this separate from the rest of my life. It's safer that way. For both of them, though he didn't say that part out loud. The Reapers wouldn't understand this impulse toward protection, toward something resembling goodness. They'd see it as weakness, and weakness in the club was a dangerous thing. Sarah seemed to understand anyway. She nodded slowly. How long do we have? As long as you need. Another lie, or maybe just hope disguised as certainty. Marcus wasn't sure how long he could maintain this double life, protecting them while fulfilling his obligations to the club. But he'd figure it out. He had to. Mama, can we go inside? Emma had crept closer, looking up at them with those serious dark eyes. Is this really going to be our house? Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, brushing a strand of hair from the little girl's face. Maybe, baby. We're just going to look around first, okay? Marcus handed over the key, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Sarah's skin was warm, real, so different from the cold metal and leather that made up most of his world. Thank you, she said quietly, and the words carried weight beyond their simplicity. As he watched her unlock the door and follow her children inside, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the fragile, terrifying sensation of hope. It was dangerous, this feeling. Hope made you vulnerable, gave you something to lose. But as he heard Emma's delighted laugh echo from inside the house, he decided maybe some risks were worth taking. The diner's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Jake's weathered face as he slid into the cracked vinyl booth. Across from him, Detective Sarah Chen pushed a steaming cup of black coffee in his direction, her dark eyes studying him with the intensity of someone who'd spent years reading people's lies. You look like hell, Torino, she said, stirring sugar into her own cup. When's the last time you slept? Jake wrapped his fingers around the ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into his calloused hands. Sleep's overrated. He took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. You said this was important. Chen leaned back, her expression carefully neutral. She'd been working organized crime for 8 years, and Jake had been one of her most reliable sources when it came to the Iron Wolves' activities. Their relationship was built on mutual benefit. He fed her information that kept the club's more violent tendencies in check, and she made sure certain arrests happened when key members were conveniently absent. We've got a problem, she said quietly. Word came down from the DEA. They're planning a major sweep on the Wolves' distribution network. Next week. Jake's jaw tightened. How major? RICO charges. They're going after everyone. Prospects, full patches, even the old ladies who run errands. Chen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They know about the warehouse on 5th Street. They know about the money laundering through the auto shop. And they know about the gun running. The coffee turned to acid in Jake's stomach. A RICO sweep meant they weren't just targeting individual crimes. They were going after the entire organization as a criminal enterprise. Everyone connected to the club would be swept up in the net, guilty or innocent. What's their timeline? He asked. Coordinated raids start Thursday morning. They're hitting 12 locations simultaneously. Chen pulled out her phone, pretending to check messages while she spoke. Jake, if you're smart, you'll be somewhere far away when this goes down. Take a vacation. Visit family, whatever you need to do. But Jake's mind wasn't on escape routes. He was thinking about Emma and the kids, about the small apartment ED helped them secure just 6 blocks from the Iron Wolves clubhouse, about how Tommy had started calling him Uncle Jake and how Lucy had drawn him a picture that he'd tucked into his wallet, about Emma's smile when he'd brought groceries last week and the way she'd started to trust him, despite every instinct telling her not to. "The clubhouse too?" he asked. Chen nodded grimly. "First on the list. They've been building this case for 2 years, Jake. They have recordings, financial records, testimony from 3 cooperating witnesses. Viper's going down, and he's taking everyone with him." Jake thought about the emergency cash stash in his apartment, the clean papers he'd kept updated out of habit. He could be on the road in an hour, disappear into the wind like he'd done twice before when things got hot. The smart play was to run, the safe play. "There's something else," Chen continued, her voice taking on an edge. "One of their witnesses mentioned a woman and 2 kids. Said Viper's been asking questions about some family caught the attention of one of his enforcers." The blood drained from Jake's face. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that usually end badly for families." Chen leaned forward, her cop instincts clearly picking up on his reaction. "Jake, please tell me you're not mixed up with civilians. Please tell me you haven't done something stupid." He stood abruptly, throwing a $10 bill on the table. "I gotta go." "Jake, wait." Chen grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. "If there's a family involved, if there are innocent people caught in this mess, I can help. Witness protection, relocation, whatever they need. But only if you help me help them." For a moment, Jake wavered. Chen was offering him exactly what Emma and the kids needed. A clean escape, federal protection, a real chance at safety. All he had to do was trust the system, trust that a bureaucracy that moved at glacial speed could protect them from Viper's immediate wrath. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Don't think too long," Chen called after him as he headed for the door. "Thursday's coming whether we're ready or not." Outside, the autumn air bit at his skin as Jake climbed onto his Harley. The engine roared to life, drowning out the chaos in his head. As he pulled into traffic, his phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "Tommy's soccer game is tomorrow at 3. You said you'd try to make it." Jake stared at the message for a long moment before tucking the phone away. Thursday was 5 days away. 5 days to figure out how to save the only family that had ever really mattered to him, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. The Harley's engine growled as he accelerated into the night, racing against time he didn't have. The phone buzzed against Jake's chest at 3 in the morning, dragging him from restless sleep. Sarah's number flashed on the screen, and his blood went cold. She'd never called this late. "Jake?" Her voice trembled through the speaker. "Someone's been watching us." He was already pulling on his boots. "Where are you?" "The motel on 5th Street, room 12. There's a van that's been parked across the street for hours. The engine keeps running, but nobody gets out. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Jake grabbed his jacket and keys, checking the Glock tucked into his waistband. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." The Harley roared to life, cutting through the empty streets like a blade. Jake's mind raced faster than the engine. Word had gotten out somehow. Either someone in the club had figured out his connection to Sarah, or worse, Marcus had put surveillance on him. Either way, the family was exposed. The motel sat in a pool of yellow streetlight, its neon sign flickering intermittently. Jake spotted the van immediately, a black Chevy with tinted windows idling in the parking lot of a closed gas station across the road. Amateur hour. Real professionals wouldn't be that obvious. He circled the block, studying the setup. Only one vehicle, probably 2 occupants max. These weren't club members. They moved wrong, parked wrong. But that didn't make them less dangerous. Jake pulled into the motel lot and knocked softly on door 12. "It's me." Sarah opened it just wide enough for him to slip inside. Emma and Tyler were curled together on one bed, mercifully asleep. Sarah's face was pale, her hands shaking as she pointed toward the window. "They've been there since midnight. I saw someone get out earlier and walk around the building." Jake peered through a gap in the curtains. The van hadn't moved, but he could make out the silhouette of at least one person in the driver's seat. His jaw tightened. This wasn't random. Someone knew exactly where to find them. Pack everything. Now. He turned to Sarah, keeping his voice low but urgent. We're leaving. Where can we go? I don't have money for another. Don't worry about money. Jake was already moving, checking sightlines and exit routes. There's a back door near the ice machine. We'll use that. As Sarah quietly gathered their belongings, Jake called Tommy from the club's garage. The kid owed him favors and knew how to keep his mouth shut. I need a car. Clean plates, full tank. Bring it to the Denny's on Morrison in 20 minutes. Jake, man, it's 3 a.m. 20 minutes, Tommy. While they waited for Sarah to pack, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Pretty family. Be a shame if something happened to them. His blood turned to ice. This wasn't surveillance, it was a threat. Someone was sending a message and they wanted him to know it. Sarah. He showed her the text. We need to go now. They slipped out the back exit, Jake carrying their bags while Sarah guided the still sleeping children. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. They moved like shadows between the buildings, Jake's eyes constantly scanning for movement. The walk to Denny's took 15 minutes through back alleys and side streets. Tommy's borrowed Honda sat in the far corner of the parking lot, keys hidden under the rear bumper as promised. Jake helped Sarah settle the kids in the back seat, their small bodies limp with exhaustion. Where are we going? Sarah asked as Jake started the engine. Somewhere safe. I know a place. He pulled out of the lot, checking the mirrors obsessively. No headlights followed them into the street. The cabin belonged to an old army buddy who owed Jake his life from their deployment in Afghanistan. It sat 30 miles outside the city, hidden among pine trees and accessible only by a narrow dirt road. No cell towers, no neighbors, no way to track them. As they drove through the darkness, Sarah finally asked the question Jake had been dreading. This is because of you, isn't it? Because you helped us. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. In the back seat, Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about her stuffed rabbit. The sound twisted something deep in his chest. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. What happens now? Jake stared at the empty road stretching ahead, illuminated only by the Honda's headlights. Behind them lay everything he'd known for the past decade, the club, the brotherhood, the only family he'd ever claimed. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also something he'd never had before, a chance to be better than what he was. Now I figure out who's hunting you, he said, and I make sure they never get close again. The words felt like a promise and a declaration of war rolled into one. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and cigarette smoke, familiar scents that usually brought Jake comfort. Tonight, they made his stomach turn. He stood in the shadows near the loading dock, watching Tommy the Hammer Castellano pace back and forth like a caged animal, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. 3 shipments, boys. 3 fucking shipments the cops knew exactly where to find. Tommy's face was red with rage, spittle flying from his lips. Someone's been singing like a goddamn canary. Jake kept his expression neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The club had been moving stolen electronics through the warehouse for months, and he'd made sure Sarah knew to avoid this part of town completely. But somehow, law enforcement had gotten wind of their operation. Could be anyone, muttered Razor, cleaning his fingernails with a switchblade. Maybe we got sloppy. Tommy whirled on him. Sloppy? I don't do sloppy. Someone talked, and I'm going to find out who. His eyes swept the room, landing on each member with suspicious intensity. When his gaze reached Jake, it lingered a moment longer than comfortable. What about you, Reaper? Tommy's voice carried a dangerous edge. You've been awful quiet lately. Missing meetings, showing up late? Got something on your mind? Jake forced himself to meet Tommy's stare. Just been dealing with some personal shit. Nothing that affects the club. Personal shit? Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. We're your family, remember? Your only family. What could be more personal than that? Before Jake could respond, the warehouse door burst open. Two prospects stumbled in, dragging a bloodied man between them. Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized Detective Martinez, the cop who'd been asking questions around Sarah's neighborhood. "Found this pig sniffing around the shipping yard," one of the prospects announced. "Had photos of our trucks." Tommy's face split into a predatory grin. "Well, well, looks like we found our leak." He walked over to Martinez, who was barely conscious, his face a mess of bruises and blood. "You going to tell us who's feeding you information, detective? Or do we have to get creative?" Jake's hands clenched into fists. Martinez wasn't dirty, he was just doing his job. And if Tommy started torturing him for information he didn't have, this would end badly for everyone. But intervening would only draw more suspicion. "Maybe he followed one of us," Jake suggested carefully. "Cops aren't stupid. They know how to conduct surveillance." Tommy's head snapped toward him. "You defending this piece of shit, Reaper?" "I'm being practical. If we start torturing cops, we bring down heat we can't handle. The serpents have survived this long because we're smart about our business." "Smart?" Tommy's voice rose to a shout. "Smart is eliminating threats before they eliminate us." He grabbed Martinez by the hair, forcing his head up. "This cocksucker has been building a case against us for months. I can smell it on him." Jake watched in horror as Tommy pulled out a pistol, pressing it against Martinez's temple. The detective's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware enough to understand his situation. "Wait," Martinez mumbled through swollen lips. I know who you're looking for." Tommy paused, intrigued. "Yeah? Who's the rat?" Jake's heart stopped. If Martinez said his name, even as a desperate lie to buy time, it would all be over. Sarah and the kids would be left defenseless while Jake bled out on this concrete floor. "Internal Affairs," Martinez gasped. "They've been monitoring our communications. Someone in your organization, they don't know about them." It was a clever lie, Jake realized. Internal Affairs investigations were secretive enough that Tommy couldn't easily verify the claim, and it deflected suspicion away from any specific club member. Tommy's grip on the gun tightened. "You expect me to believe that? Check your phones," Martinez wheezed. "How else would we know your delivery schedules?" Jake saw uncertainty flicker across Tommy's face. The club did coordinate everything through burner phones, but they replaced them regularly. If Ia had somehow compromised their communications— "He's lying," Razor snarled. "Cops always lie." "Maybe," Tommy said slowly, "but maybe he's got a point. How did they know about tonight's shipment?" He looked around the room again, his paranoia shifting focus. Nobody outside this room knew the schedule. Jake felt a small surge of relief, but it was short-lived. Whether Martinez lived or died, the club was unraveling. Tommy's paranoia would only get worse, and eventually his suspicion would fall on Jake again. There was no way to protect Sarah and the children while remaining loyal to the serpents. The realization hit him like a physical blow. After 15 years of brotherhood, of blood and loyalty and shared violence, it was over. He'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and there was no going back. Tommy raised the gun again, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Let's see how much this pig really knows." The rain hammered against the motel room window as Jake paced the narrow space between the two beds. Sarah sat with Emma curled against her side, while Tommy played quietly with a toy truck on the threadbare carpet. 3 days had passed since he'd moved them here, 3 days of looking over his shoulder and waiting for his phone to ring with orders he couldn't follow. "You're making me nervous," Sarah said softly, watching him wear a path in the faded carpet. Jake stopped mid-stride, his hands clenched into fists. "Sorry, just thinking." The truth was, he couldn't stop thinking. About Marcus's cold eyes when he'd declined the last 2 runs, about the way conversations stopped when he entered the clubhouse, about the envelope of cash hidden in his saddlebags that should have been turned over to the club treasury days ago. His phone buzzed. "Marcus! Church tonight. 8 sharp. Don't be late again." Jake's blood turned to ice. Church meetings weren't casual gatherings. They were where serious club business got handled, where members who'd stepped out of line faced consequences. "I have to go out for a while," he said, grabbing his leather jacket from the chair. Sarah's eyes widened with concern. "Jake, what's wrong? You look—" "I'll be back before midnight." He knelt down beside Tommy, ruffling the boy's hair. "Take care of your mom and sister while I'm gone, okay, champ?" Tommy nodded solemnly, and something twisted in Jake's chest. When had this kid's approval started mattering so much? The ride to the clubhouse felt like a funeral procession. Other bikes were already lined up outside the converted warehouse, their chrome dulled by the persistent rain. Jake's boots echoed on the concrete as he walked through the bay doors, past the lifted cars and scattered tools. The brothers were already gathered around the scarred wooden table in the back room. Marcus sat at the head, flanked by Diesel and two other officers Jake had ridden with for years. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. "Look who decided to show up," Diesel muttered, not looking up from cleaning his fingernails with a switchblade. Jake took his usual seat, keeping his expression neutral. Around the table, familiar faces studied him with varying degrees of suspicion and disappointment. These men had been his family for 8 years. They'd bled together, fought together, buried brothers together. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his pale eyes fixed on Jake. "We've got a problem, brother. 3 missed runs in 2 weeks. Radio silence when we need you, and word is you're playing house with some civilian family." The last words hit like a physical blow. Jake fought to keep his face blank, but Marcus's slight smile told him he'd failed. "Don't know what you heard, but—" "Cut the shit!" Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. "You think we don't keep tabs on our own? You've been spotted at that Fleabag motel on Route 9. Same motel where a certain single mother and her kids have been staying." Jake's hand moved instinctively toward the knife on his belt, but Diesel's blade was already pointing at his throat. "Easy there, lover boy," Diesel sneered. "Wouldn't want to do something stupid." Marcus stood slowly, his bulk casting a shadow across the table. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to choose, right here, right now, your colors and your brothers or your new little family." The room fell silent except for the rain drumming on the metal roof. Jake looked around the table at faces he'd known for years, men who'd pulled him out of gutter and given him purpose when he had nothing. But all he could see was Emma's gap-toothed smile and Tommy's worried eyes. "There's a shipment coming through tomorrow night," Marcus continued. "Big one. We need every brother on it, including you. You're either with us completely or you're out. And if you're out," he shrugged, "well, ex-members who know too much don't usually stay healthy very long." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jake had seen what happened to brothers who tried to leave the life. Some moved far away and kept their mouths shut. Others weren't so lucky. "I need time to think," Jake said finally. Marcus checked his watch. "You've got 18 hours. Be here tomorrow at 6, ready to ride, or don't come back at all." His smile was razor thin. "And Jake, if you choose the family, you better make sure they disappear too, far away, because this club has a long memory and longer reach." Jake stood on unsteady legs, the weight of 8 years pressing down on his shoulders. At the door, he turned back to see Marcus already in deep conversation with Diesel, their heads bent over a map spread across the table. The rain had intensified by the time he reached his bike, and Jake sat in the parking lot for a long moment, water streaming down his face. Tomorrow night would change everything. The only question was whether he'd have the courage to make the right choice. The warehouse sat in industrial silence, its corrugated metal walls reflecting the harsh morning light. Marcus pulled his Harley alongside 3 other bikes, their chrome catching the sun like scattered coins. Inside, Viper paced behind a makeshift desk constructed from shipping pallets, his weathered face twisted in concentration as he studied surveillance photos spread across the surface. "Phoenix!" Viper called without looking up. "Good timing." Marcus approached, his boots echoing against concrete stained with decades of motor oil and worse things. The photos showed the pharmaceutical distribution center from every angle, loading docks, security cameras, guard rotations. It was the job they'd been planning for weeks, the one that would net the club enough cash to expand their territory into 3 neighboring counties. Snake and Diesel did good recon, Viper continued, tapping one of the images. Place is softer than we thought. Minimal security, skeleton crew on weekends. We hit it Saturday night. What's the take looking like? Marcus kept his voice level, professional. Conservative estimate? 250,000 in opioids, maybe more. Street value puts us north of 2 million. Viper's grin was predatory. Enough to buy ourselves some serious protection and expansion capital. The numbers should have excited him. 6 months ago they would have. But now Marcus felt only a cold weight settling in his stomach. He thought of Emma helping Michael with his homework at the motel's small table, her face illuminated by the lamp they'd bought at a thrift store. Sophie practicing dance moves in the narrow space between the beds, her laughter infectious despite their circumstances. I need to ask you something, Marcus said carefully. Viper's eyes sharpened. Ask. The family I've been helping, the mother and kids, they need to relocate. Relocate? Viper set down a photo, his full attention now focused on Marcus. Why? Marcus had prepared for this question, crafted a story that contained enough truth to be believable. Ex-husband's getting out of prison next month. Real piece of work. Used to beat her pretty bad. Word is he's been asking around, trying to track her down. And this is our problem. How? It's not. It's mine. I just need a few days to help them get settled somewhere safe. Maybe miss the pharmaceutical job. Come in on the next one. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Viper's expression remained unreadable, but Marcus could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. In the background, Snake and Diesel continued their conversation about motorcycle modifications, oblivious to the tension building at the makeshift desk. You know what your problem is, Phoenix, Viper finally said, his voice deceptively casual. You're thinking with your heart instead of your head. I'm thinking about loyalty. These people trusted me. And what about your loyalty to this club? To your brothers? Viper gestured towards Snake and Diesel. We've been planning this job for months. Everyone has a role. You think we can just shuffle the deck because you caught feelings for some homeless broad? The insult hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain still. It's not like that. Isn't it? Viper stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. You've been different lately. Distracted. Missing church meetings, turning down profitable side jobs. Now you want to abandon your brothers for what? To play house with someone else's kids? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm asking for a few days. And I'm telling you no. Viper's voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. The pharmaceutical job happens Saturday. You're part of it. End of discussion. Marcus felt the walls of his old life closing in around him. He'd known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it so soon. The club had given him purpose when he had nothing, brotherhood when he was alone, identity when he was lost. But now, that same loyalty felt like chains dragging him toward a darkness he no longer wanted to embrace. What if I refuse? The words left his mouth before he could stop them. The warehouse fell silent. Snake and Diesel's conversation ceased abruptly. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade away. Viper's face went completely blank, which Marcus knew from experience was far more dangerous than anger. Nobody refuses a direct order, Viper said softly. Not in this club. You know that. And if someone did, then they'd better hope they could run fast and hide well, because the iron serpents don't forget, and we sure as hell don't forgive. Viper leaned back against the pallet desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes cold as winter. But that's all theoretical, isn't it? Because my brother Phoenix would never put some random family above his own blood. Marcus met his stare, feeling the weight of 15 years with the club pressing down on his shoulders. Everything he'd built, everyone he'd called family, balanced on the edge of his next words. The warehouse stood like a concrete tomb in the industrial district, its windows dark except for the pale glow seeping from the loading dock. Marcus killed the Harley's engine 3 blocks away, the sudden silence feeling heavier than the rumble that had carried him here. His leather jacket offered little protection against the December wind, but the cold gnawing at his bones had nothing to do with weather. He'd left Sarah and the kids at the safe house with explicit instructions to stay put, dead-bolted behind steel doors with enough supplies for a week. The fear in Sarah's eyes when he'd kissed her goodbye still burned in his memory. She knew what this was, a reckoning that had been building since the moment he'd chosen her over the club. The Reaper's bikes lined the back alley like metal vultures. Marcus counted them automatically. 15 machines, meaning the inner circle was here. Tank's custom chopper dominated the row, its chrome gleaming under the security lights. No doubt they'd been planning this moment since his defection, waiting for him to surface so they could deliver their own brand of justice. Marcus checked the Glock tucked against his ribs, then the backup piece strapped to his ankle. The weapons felt inadequate against 15 men who'd kill him without hesitation, but going in unarmed would be suicide. At least this way, he might take a few of them down before they finished him. The loading dock side entrance hung open, spilling yellow light across oil-stained concrete. Marcus approached from the shadows, his boots silent on the broken asphalt. The familiar rumble of voices carried from inside, Tank's gravelly bark, Spider's nasal whine, the nervous laughter of prospects trying to prove their worth. "Should have known the bastard would run," Tank was saying. 20 years I vouched for him, brought him up through the ranks. This is how he repays that loyalty. "He'll surface eventually," came Spider's reply. "Got nowhere else to go. When he does, we'll be waiting." Marcus stepped into the doorway, hands visible but ready. "No need to wait. I'm here." The warehouse fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. 15 men turned toward him with predatory focus, their cuts identifying them as the club's most dangerous members. Tank stood at the center, his massive frame blocking the light, beard shot through with grey that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "Look what crawled out of the gutter," Tank said, his voice carrying equal measures of disappointment and rage. "Marcus fucking Kane, the man who forgot where he came from." "I remember exactly where I came from," Marcus replied, stepping fully into the warehouse. The space was empty except for scattered crates and the men who wanted him dead. "Question is whether you remember what this club used to stand for." Tank's laugh held no humor. "Used to stand for? We stand for the same thing we always have. Loyalty, brotherhood, respect. You're the one who forgot those principles when you chose some piece of ass over your brothers." The words hit like physical blows, but Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Her name is Sarah. And those kids you threatened? They're 8 and 5 years old. What kind of brotherhood targets children? The kind that doesn't tolerate betrayal." Spider stepped forward, switchblade appearing in his hand like magic. "You cost us a fortune when you burned that shipment. Made us look weak in front of our suppliers. Blood needs to answer for that." Marcus's hand drifted toward his weapon. "The only blood on my hands belongs to men who had it coming. Unlike you animals, I don't make war on innocents." The circle tightened around him, boots scraping on concrete. Marcus counted exits, the loading dock behind Tank's position, a fire door to his left blocked by 3 prospects, windows too high to reach. They'd chosen their ground well, turning the warehouse into a kill box with himself as the target. "You always were self-righteous," Tank said, pulling a 357 from his waistband. "Thought you were better than the rest of us. But underneath all that moral superiority, you're just another killer in leather. The only difference is we're honest about what we are." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but I'm trying to be something better. For them, for myself. You should understand that. You've got a daughter somewhere, right? What would you do if she needed protecting?" Tank's face darkened. "Don't you dare bring my family into this." "Why not? She's probably terrified of what her father really is, just like Sarah's kids were terrified until I showed them not all bikers are monsters." A shot echoed through the warehouse before Marcus saw Tank's finger move. Pain exploded through his left shoulder, spinning him sideways as the bullet tore through leather and flesh. He rolled behind a concrete pillar as more shots erupted, chunks of stone exploding around him. Blood soaked his jacket, but the wound felt clean, through and through, missing bone and major arteries. He'd survive if he could get out of here alive. The Glock filled his hand as boots thundered across concrete, His brothers turned executioners closing in for the kill. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and violence. Jake's boots echoed against the concrete as he entered, his cut heavy on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The reapers had gathered in full force, 23 men arranged in a loose circle around the center of the space where Tank stood waiting. "Brother!" Tank called out, his voice carrying that dangerous edge Jake had learned to recognize over the years. "Glad you could join us." Jake's eyes swept the room, cataloging faces. Some nodded in greeting, others watched him with calculating stares. Word traveled fast in the club, and he could feel the weight of their suspicion settling around him like fog. "Wouldn't miss it," Jake replied, stepping into the circle. His hand instinctively checked the position of the knife in his boot, old habits dying hard. Tank smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Good, because we've got a problem that needs solving." He gestured to a figure hunched in a chair near the back wall. Blood trickled from the man's nose, and his hands were zip-tied behind him. Jake recognized him immediately. Marcus Rodriguez, one of their regular buyers, a mid-level dealer who moved product through the east side. The same east side where Sarah and her kids were supposed to be safe in their new apartment. "Marcus here has been skimming," Tank continued, circling the bound man like a predator. "Taking our product, cutting it with baking soda, keeping the profits. Thought we wouldn't notice." "Tank, man, I can explain." Marcus started, but Tank's backhand cut him off. "I'm not talking to you." Tank's gaze locked onto Jake. "I'm talking to my enforcer. The man who's supposed to make sure this kind of disrespect doesn't happen." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Jake felt every pair of eyes on him, measuring his response. This was a test, and they all knew it. Tank had orchestrated this moment carefully, choosing Marcus specifically because Jake had been handling that territory. "How long has this been going on?" Jake asked, his voice steady. 3 months, maybe 4, Tank replied. "Right around the time you started getting distracted." The word hung in the air like smoke. Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I've been handling my responsibilities." "Have you?" Tank pulled out a small plastic bag filled with white powder. "This is what we gave Marcus last week. Pure product, 90% clean. This," he held up another bag, "is what he was selling on the streets. Maybe 30% if he was feeling generous." Jake studied the evidence, buying himself time to think. Marcus was small-time, stupid, but not malicious. The kind of dealer who got in over his head and made desperate choices. Under normal circumstances, Jake would have handled this quietly. A beating, maybe broken fingers, enough to send a message without destroying the relationship entirely. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Marcus," Jake said, turning to face the beaten man. "You have kids?" The question seemed to surprise everyone, including Marcus. He nodded slowly. 2 daughters, 7 and 9. "And you thought stealing from us was a good way to provide for them?" "I got behind on rent," Marcus whispered. "My girl lost her job, and the kids needed school clothes, and I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Tank interrupted. "Dead wrong." He pulled a .45 from his waistband and held it out to Jake. "Time to clean up your mess, brother." Jake stared at the gun. The metal gleamed under the harsh warehouse lights, and he could see his distorted reflection in the barrel. Around him, the reapers waited in perfect silence. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Tank's chess move, forcing Jake to choose between his old life and the new one he'd been trying to build. Sarah's face flashed in his mind, Emma asking him to read her a story, Tommy showing off his new school supplies, the family that had given him something worth fighting for, worth protecting. But if he refused Tank now, if he broke ranks in front of the entire club, it wouldn't just be his own death sentence. Tank would make sure Sarah and the kids paid the price for his betrayal. Jake reached for the gun, feeling its familiar weight settle into his palm. Marcus began to sob quietly, probably thinking about his own daughters. "Please," Marcus whispered. "I'll pay it back. Every penny, I swear." Tank laughed coldly. Too late for that. He looked at Jake expectantly. Do it. Jake raised the gun, and Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. The warehouse held its collective breath. Then Jake turned and pressed the barrel against Tank's temple instead. No, he said quietly. I don't think I will. The explosion of surprised shouts and the sound of 22 men reaching for their weapons filled the warehouse like thunder. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Marcus stepped through the heavy metal doors, the familiar scent of motor oil and cigarettes doing nothing to calm his nerves. 3 weeks had passed since he'd walked away from the club, 3 weeks of looking over his shoulder and sleeping with one eye open. But Viper's message had been clear. Come alone, or Sarah and the kids would pay the price. The main floor stretched out before him. Motorcycles lined up like sleeping beasts under the harsh fluorescent lights. His boots echoed against the concrete as he made his way deeper into the space, hyper-aware of every shadow, every potential hiding spot. The weight of the Glock tucked into his waistband provided little comfort. He was walking into a trap, and they both knew it. Took you long enough. Viper's voice cut through the silence from somewhere above. Marcus looked up to see the club president standing on the catwalk that ran along the second level, his arms crossed over his chest. Starting to think you'd lost your spine along with your loyalty. I'm here. Let's get this over with. Marcus kept his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Where are they? Viper's laugh was cold as winter steel. Straight to business. I always respected that about you, Marcus. No small talk, no bullshit. He began descending the metal stairs, his heavy boots clanging against each step. But you really fucked us over with that warehouse raid, brother. Cost us a lot of money, a lot of trust. I'm not your brother anymore. The words came out harder than Marcus intended. And you brought this on yourselves the moment you decided to hurt innocent people. Innocent people? Viper reached the bottom of the stairs, and Marcus could see the fury blazing in his eyes. You mean your little girlfriend and her brats? The ones you chose over your real family? Movement caught Marcus's attention in his peripheral vision. 2 figures emerged from behind a row of motorcycles, Tank and Razor, both armed and flanking him on either side. His muscles tensed, calculating distances and angles. 3 against 1, and he still didn't know where Sarah and the kids were being held. You want to see them so bad? Viper pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward Marcus. The video feed showed a small room, probably an office upstairs, where Sarah sat tied to a chair, Emma and Dylan huddled close to her feet. They looked terrified but unharmed. For now, relief and rage warred in Marcus's chest. Let them go, Viper. This is between us. No, it stopped being just between us the moment you put on that wire. Viper pocketed the phone. See, the feds are very interested in our operation now. They're breathing down our necks because of you. So I figure, an eye for an eye. Marcus's hand inched toward his weapon. What do you want? I want you to suffer like you made us suffer. Viper nodded to Tank and Razor. But first, I want some information. The feds got a lot from that warehouse, but they didn't get everything. I know you held back. I know there's more you could give them. The plan crystallized in Marcus's mind with sudden clarity. Viper didn't just want revenge. He wanted to know what else Marcus might have told the authorities. Which meant he was scared, desperate even. Desperate men made mistakes. You're right, Marcus said, raising his hands slowly. There is more, a lot more. Viper's eyes gleamed with interest. I'm listening. The shipment coming in next week, the one from the Colombian contacts. Marcus watched as greed replaced some of the anger in Viper's expression. I know the route, the safe houses, everything, but I'm not saying another word until I see them walk out of here. You're in no position to make demands. But Viper's voice held less conviction now. Then kill me. Marcus spread his arms wide. Go ahead. But when that shipment gets seized because I couldn't warn you about the surveillance team watching the docks, remember this moment. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of the ventilation system. Marcus could see the calculation in Viper's eyes, the war between vengeance and pragmatism. Tank shifted nervously, his finger hovering over the trigger of his shotgun. "Boss!" Razor's voice was uncertain. Viper held up a hand for silence, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "You always were a smart bastard. Too smart for your own good." He pulled out his phone again. "Bring them down." Marcus felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. This was just the beginning. Getting Sarah and the kids out alive would require perfect timing and probably a miracle, but for the first time since entering the warehouse, he allowed himself to believe it might be possible. The sound of footsteps on the stairs above made him look up. 2 more club members were bringing his family down, and everything would depend on what happened in the next few minutes. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Jake stepped through the door, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. Dust motes danced in shafts of amber light filtering through grimy windows, and the acrid smell of motor oil and rust hung heavy in the air. 23 years he'd walked into this place as a brother. Tonight he walked in as a dead man. The devils were already assembled, their faces hard shadows in the dim lighting. Viper sat at the head of the makeshift table, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the scarred wood. To his right stood Marcus, arms crossed, that familiar sneer playing at his lips. The others formed a loose semicircle, blocking any easy exit. "Jake." Viper's voice carried no warmth, no trace of the camaraderie they'd once shared. "Heard you've been busy." Jake kept his hands loose at his sides, muscles coiled but ready. He'd left his gun in the truck. Walking in armed would have been suicide. Instead, he carried something more dangerous, the truth. "Depends what you heard." Jake's eyes swept the room, cataloguing positions, calculating odds. 8 men, all armed, all prepared to kill him on Viper's word. Marcus tells an interesting story. Viper leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "Says you cost us $500,000 in product. Says you've gone soft over some junkie whore and her brats." The words hit like a physical blow, but Jake held his ground. "Marcus says a lot of things, most of them bullshit." A ripple of tension moved through the room. Someone's hand drifted toward a concealed weapon. Jake forced himself to breathe steadily, to project calm he didn't feel. "Is it true?" Viper's question cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you burn our warehouse?" Jake met his president's stare without flinching. 23 years of loyalty, of bleeding for this club, of following orders without question, and it came down to this moment. The weight of his decision settled over him like armor. "Yeah, I did." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Jake watched recognition dawn in Viper's eyes, saw the last vestiges of their brotherhood crumble to dust. "Why?" Viper's voice was barely above a whisper. Jake thought of Sarah's face when she'd looked at him in that motel room, the trust in her eyes despite everything she knew about him. He thought of Emma's laughter, of Tommy's quiet courage, of the way they'd made him remember what it felt like to be human, because it was the right thing to do. Marcus stepped forward, his hand already on his gun. "The right thing? You destroyed everything we built for some random family that means nothing." "They mean everything." Jake's voice carried a conviction that surprised even him. "More than this club ever did, more than any of you ever could." The words were a declaration of war, and everyone in the room knew it. Jake saw hands moving toward weapons, saw the cold calculation in Viper's eyes as he weighed loyalty against necessity. "You know what happens to brothers who betray the club." Viper stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the floor. "What you've done. There's no coming back from this, Jake, no forgiveness." "I'm not asking for forgiveness." Jake's hand moved to his jacket pocket, and every gun in the room swung toward him. He moved slowly, deliberately, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I'm asking for time." He tossed the document onto the table. Viper glanced down, his brow furrowing as he read. "What the hell is this?" "Federal asset forfeiture warrant." Jake's voice was steady. "Every property the club owns, every account, every business front, it's all getting seized tomorrow morning, unless you're all gone by dawn." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake watched understanding dawn on their faces, saw the pieces clicking into place. "You're wearing a wire," Marcus snarled, his gun clearing leather. "Joe," Jake spread his arms wide. "Check if you want. But that warrant's real, and the feds are already in position. You've got maybe 6 hours before this place is crawling with federal agents." Viper's face had gone pale beneath his beard. "You gave them everything." "Not everything." Jake's smile held no warmth. "I kept back enough to destroy what's left if anything happens to Sarah and her kids. Ever. You touch them, you even look at them wrong, and I'll burn whatever you manage to rebuild to the ground." The warehouse erupted in angry voices, guns being drawn, chairs scraping against concrete. But Viper raised a hand, and the chaos settled into tense silence. "You've signed your own death warrant, Jake." "Maybe." Jake began backing toward the door, his eyes never leaving Viper's face. "But I've bought them a life. Fair trade." He reached the threshold and paused, looking one last time at the men who'd been his brothers, his family, his whole world for more than 2 decades. "Goodbye, Viper." Then he stepped into the night, leaving his old life behind forever. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and old motor oil, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus crouched behind a stack of empty crates, counting the figures moving in the dim light ahead. 6 men, all armed, all dangerous. Viper's final meeting before the territory war erupted into full chaos. His phone buzzed silently against his chest. Sarah's text was brief, "Kids asking when you're coming home." Home. The word hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. 3 months ago he wouldn't have understood what she meant. Now it was everything. "You sure about this?" Tommy whispered from beside him, checking his pistol for the 3rd time. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Marcus nodded, though his throat felt dry as sandpaper. They'd been planning this for weeks, gathering evidence, documenting the Club S operations, building a case that would bring down the entire organization. Tonight was their chance to record Viper finalizing the deal that would flood the streets with enough drugs to destroy a dozen neighborhoods. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 15 years building this brotherhood, spilling blood for men who called themselves family. Now he was about to tear it all down for a woman and 2 children he'd known for less than a year. "Movement," Tommy hissed. Viper's voice echoed across the warehouse as he emerged from the shadows with 3 other club members. Marcus recognized them all: Snake, Bull, and Crow, men he'd ridden with, fought alongside, trusted with his life. The weight of betrayal sat heavy in his stomach. "The shipment arrives Tuesday," Viper was saying to someone hidden in the darkness. 50 kilos of pure product. Enough to own this entire city. A figure stepped into the light, a thin man in an expensive suit Marcus had never seen before, the supplier they'd been hunting for months. "My associates in Colombia don't appreciate complications," the stranger said, his accent thick. "This territorial dispute of yours is attracting unwanted attention." "It'll be handled," Viper replied, lighting a cigarette. "Marcus won't be a problem much longer." Tommy grabbed Marcus's arm as he started to move. The casual way Viper spoke about ending his life should have surprised him, but it didn't. He'd seen enough brothers discarded when they became inconvenient. "The product moves through the docks Tuesday night," the supplier continued. "My people will handle transportation. Your job is distribution and territory protection. Any interference won't happen." Viper cut him off. "We've got judges, cops, dock workers all on payroll, clean as a whistle." Marcus adjusted the recording device in his jacket pocket, making sure it caught every word. This was it, the evidence they needed to bring down not just the club, but the entire distribution network. Dozens of arrests, maybe hundreds. The supplier handed Viper a briefcase. "Half now, half on delivery. Don't disappoint us." As the man melted back into the shadows, Viper turned to his lieutenants. "Bull, I want you watching the docks. Snake, handle the street teams. Crow," he paused, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "Find Marcus. It's time to remind him where his loyalties should lie." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Sarah, Emma, Danny. If Crow found them, he was moving before conscious thought took over, rising from behind the crates with his gun drawn. Nobody's going anywhere. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Viper spun, his own weapon appearing with practiced speed. Bull dove for cover behind a rusted oil drum, while Snake rolled behind a concrete pillar. Crow, closest to the exit, sprinted for the door. "Can't let him leave," Marcus shouted to Tommy, squeezing off 2 shots at Crow's retreating figure. The bullets sparked off metal beams as the man disappeared into the night. Viper's answering gunfire shattered the crate next to Marcus's head, splinters exploding like shrapnel. He rolled left, coming up behind an overturned workbench as more shots echoed through the space. 15 years, Marcus," Viper's voice carried a mixture of rage and wounded betrayal. 15 years I treated you like a son. Should have thought about that before you threatened my family, Marcus called back, reloading quickly. Tommy flanked right, his police training evident in his smooth movements. Bull spotted him and swung his rifle around, but Tommy was faster. 3 quick shots dropped the big man to the concrete. Snake tried to use the distraction to advance on Marcus's position, but miscalculated the angle. Marcus caught him in the open and fired twice center mass. Snake crumpled without a sound. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant wail of approaching sirens. Tommy must have called for backup when the shooting started. Viper's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. "This isn't over, brother. You can't protect them forever." "Watch me," Marcus replied. But he was talking to empty air. When the police flooded the warehouse 5 minutes later, they found 2 bodies and enough evidence to dismantle the largest criminal organization the city had ever seen. But Viper and Crow were gone, vanished into the night like smoke. The war was just beginning. The warehouse district looked like a graveyard of rusted metal and broken dreams in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a shipping container, watching the Reaper's stronghold through binoculars. 2 guards flanked the main entrance, assault rifles slung across their chests. More shadows moved behind grimy windows on the 2nd floor. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera, "Teams in position. Remember, we need Tank alive to testify." Marcus pocketed the device and checked his Glock one final time. The wire taped to his chest felt like it was burning through his skin, a constant reminder that everything depended on the next hour. Sarah and the kids were safe in protective custody, but Tank had made it clear, cross the club, and there was nowhere far enough to run. The rumble of motorcycles echoed through the empty streets. Marcus melted deeper into shadow as 3 bikes roared past, heading for the warehouse. He recognized the riders, Razor, Bones, and Viper. Tank was gathering his inner circle. "All units, targets are consolidating," Rivera's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Stick to the plan." The plan was simple in concept, suicidal in execution. Marcus would walk in the front door like nothing had changed, trigger Tank's confession about ordering the hit on the Rodriguez family, then survive long enough for the tactical teams to breach. Simple. He emerged from cover and walked toward the warehouse, each step feeling like a countdown to his own execution. The guards recognized him immediately, lowering their weapons with nods of respect. If they only knew what was about to happen. "Tank's waiting upstairs," one of them grunted. "Says you got explaining to do." The warehouse interior reeked of motor oil and stale beer. Crates of stolen electronics formed makeshift walls throughout the space, creating a maze that would complicate any assault. Marcus climbed the metal stairs to Tank's office, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. Tank sat behind a massive desk, his scarred face illuminated by a single lamp. Razor and the others flanked him, hands resting on their weapons. The air was thick with suspicion and barely contained violence. "Well, well," Tank's voice was silk over broken glass. "My favorite enforcer finally shows his face. Been looking for you, brother." Marcus forced himself to remain calm. "Had some business to handle. Thought you might want an update on the Rodriguez situation." Tank's laugh was devoid of humor. "Oh, I bet you do. See, funny thing happened after you disappeared. Got a call from some federal friends of mine. Seems they're real interested in our little operation here." The other bikers shifted, tension crackling through the room like electricity. Marcus kept his expression neutral, even as his hand drifted closer to his weapon. "Don't know what you're talking about, Tank. Then maybe you can explain why 3 of my distribution points got raided yesterday. Why my accountant found bugs in his office. Why suddenly everyone's asking questions about Miguel Rodriguez." Tank stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the room. "You know what I think happened? I think my trusted enforcer grew himself a conscience, started thinking with his heart instead of his head. Marcus decided to take the gamble. If he was going down, he'd take Tank with him. Maybe I just got tired of watching you murder innocent families for profit." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Tank's face twisted into something inhuman, all pretense dropping away. "Innocent?" Tank snarled. "Rodriguez was stealing from us, you stupid piece of shit. Him and his whole bloodline deserved what they got, just like that little family you've been playing house with. So you admit it. You ordered the hit on Rodriguez and his kids." "Damn right I did. And I'll do the same to anyone else who crosses me, including you, brother." Tank reached for his gun, but Marcus was already moving. His Glock cleared leather as the room exploded into chaos. Razor dove sideways, his own weapon spitting fire. Bullets shattered the window behind Tank's desk as Marcus rolled behind a filing cabinet. "FBI! FBI!" The tactical teams crashed through windows and doorways simultaneously, flooding the warehouse with armed agents. Gunfire erupted from the floor below as the remaining Reapers mounted their defense. Tank roared orders, trying to coordinate resistance while bullets flew around him. Marcus popped up from cover, drawing a bead on the club president's center mass. "It's over, Tank." "Like hell it is." Tank swung his rifle toward Marcus, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse, but it was Marcus who remained standing. Tank crashed backward into his chair, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Federal agents swarmed the room, weapons trained on the surviving bikers. Rivera appeared at the top of the stairs, tactical vest gleaming under the harsh lights. "Vincent Tank Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about 50 other felonies." As they cuffed Tank, the massive biker locked eyes with Marcus one final time. "This ain't over, brother. Not by a long shot." The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning, shadows stretching between abandoned buildings like dark fingers. Marcus checked his rearview mirror for the 100th time as he pulled into the loading dock behind Kozlov's seafood processing plant. Sarah sat rigid beside him, her knuckles white as she gripped the burner phone containing the evidence that would either save them or get them all killed. "They're here," she whispered, pointing to the black sedans already positioned around the building's perimeter. Marcus nodded grimly. FBI agent Chen had kept her word about the meeting, but he still felt the familiar weight of his Glock beneath his jacket. Trust didn't come easy after 20 years with the Reapers, and tonight would either end his war with Kozlov or start a bigger one. The side door opened with a metallic screech. Chen emerged first, followed by 3 other agents and a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind them came Viktor Kozlov himself, flanked by 2 bodyguards whose bulk suggested they were more than decorative. 30 minutes, Chen called out as Marcus and Sarah approached. "That's all the immunity window we negotiated. After that, everyone walks away and makes their own choices." Kozlov's pale eyes fixed on Marcus with undisguised hatred. "You cost me considerable money, Mr. Torres. My Reaper arrangement was quite profitable." "Your arrangement got kids hurt," Marcus replied evenly. "That ends tonight." Sarah stepped forward, holding up the phone. "We have recordings of you ordering the hit on the Patterson family, financial records showing payments to club members for protection services. Video evidence of your operations." The man in the suit, clearly Kozlov's lawyer, whispered urgently in his client's ear. Kozlov waved him off with visible irritation. "You have nothing that cannot be explained away," Kozlov said. "Business transactions, legitimate security services." Agent Chen smiled coldly. We also have Marcus's testimony about direct conversations, plus the location of 3 weapons used in unsolved homicides, all traceable back to your organization. Marcus watched Kozlov's face carefully. The Russian's composure cracked slightly at the mention of the weapons. Those guns represented bodies, and bodies meant life sentences. Even Kozlov couldn't lawyer his way out of that evidence. "What do you want?" Kozlov asked finally. "Complete cessation of operations in this territory," Chen replied. "You relocate your business interests out of state. You leave the Reapers alone. Most importantly, you never contact or threaten Sarah Morrison and her family again. And in exchange, the evidence disappears. Marcus keeps his mouth shut. Everyone walks away clean." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment, all the violence and pain of the past months balanced on Kozlov's decision. Behind him, Sarah's breathing was barely audible. Kozlov's bodyguard shifted slightly, and Marcus tensed. The movement was subtle, but 20 years of violence had taught him to read the signs. The man's hand was drifting toward his jacket. "Victor," the lawyer urged quietly, "the exposure risk is too high. The federal attention alone—" "I know what the attention means," Kozlov snapped. His gaze never left Marcus. "You think this ends it? You think you can just walk away from everything you've done?" "I'm not walking away," Marcus said. "I'm walking towards something better." For a moment, something like respect flickered in Kozlov's expression. Then his face hardened again. 20 years you've been what you are. That doesn't change because you found a stray family to protect." "Maybe not," Marcus admitted. "But I'm going to try." The Russian studied him for a long moment, then looked at Agent Chen, the evidence in Sarah's hand, and finally at his nervous lawyer. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of defeat. "I agree to your terms, but understand, this arrangement extends only to my organization. The Reapers have made other enemies. Your protection has limits." Chen nodded crisply. "We'll take that risk." "The weapons locations," Kozlov continued, addressing Marcus. "You'll provide those immediately." "Already in Agent Chen's possession," Marcus replied, "along with enough evidence to bury you if you break this agreement." The handshake between Chen and Kozlov was brief and purely business. No warmth, no trust, just a recognition that they'd reached the only acceptable solution. As the groups began separating, Kozlov paused near Marcus. "Your children will be safe from me," he said quietly, "but they'll grow up knowing their protector was a killer. Consider whether that's the gift you think it is." Marcus watched the black sedans disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying away the immediate threat, but leaving behind questions that would take years to answer. Sarah's hand found his arm, warm and real and anchoring. "It's over," she said. "This part is," Marcus agreed. "The rest we figure out together." Dawn was breaking over the city as they drove toward home, toward whatever redemption might look like for a man learning to live without violence.